What's up guys, Sean here, and today we're going to talk about South Africa. South Africa has been in the news lately, mainly because Tucker Carlson did a segment on the expropriation of land.
The president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, has begun, and you may have seen this in the press, seizing land from his own citizens without compensation because they are the wrong skin color. That is literally the definition of racism.
And then President Trump tweeted about it, and then the left went absolutely insane over it. Now I'm going to talk to you guys about two different issues related to South Africa. The reason I'm going to break it apart is because one has a lot of anecdotal evidence supporting it, and the other issue is just like factually the major issue in South Africa. First, we're gonna have to go into a little bit of the background. I'm gonna keep it brief because this is not a history lesson, and you guys can use Wikipedia. And in general, I think that people understand the basics of apartheid and how South Africa used to be run and the change over to how it's being run now. Apartheid was a system of government in South Africa that ended in 1994, which is really not that long ago, considering that this is something that existed in my lifetime. Apartheid, I think it's safe to say, was a little bit racist, honestly. Actually, it was a lot of bit racist. Under the system, white South Africans or Afrikaners were given special rights and privileges over black South Africans. And obviously, since South Africa is a majority black country, that could not go on forever. There was a revolution, the apartheid system was overthrown, and now they have an elected parliamentary democracy. However, when there actually is a legitimate racist form of government that gives advantages to one racial group over another, ending that oppressive regime doesn't solve all of the problems overnight. And one of the biggest political issues post-apartheid has to do with reallocation of land. Throughout apartheid, black South Africans were restricted in the types of land that they could own. Because of that, the Afrikaners owned most of the land. And unlike in a free capitalist society where somebody can just naturally accumulate a lot of wealth and a lot of land, the system was rigged to help these people get the land and rigged against other people. So there's a justified feeling that a significant proportion of the land owned by white Afrikaners is not legitimate since it wasn't gained in a free society. So the question of the day was, how would the post-apartheid government in South Africa deal with this issue? And that's an issue that still to this day divides a lot of South Africans and produces a lot of anger in South Africa. And that brings us to the two issues of the day. Now the first issue I want to knock out really quickly, and that's the idea that white farmers are being targeted and murdered for racial/political reasons. A lot of the politics are race politics, so I'm probably going to interchange those terms here and there. Question 1. Is there a lot of anecdotal evidence that there are brutal murders of white farmers in South Africa? Absolutely. We're not even having a conversation about that. You can hear stories from the victims' families. You can hear stories from people who process the crime scenes of these murders. They are horrific, they're horribly violent, and I'm not going to talk too much about that because I don't want to overload you with gruesome details to elicit an emotional response. Which brings us to question 2 and 3. Are these murders politically motivated? And are they happening at an increasing rate statistically? And the answer to both of those questions is we don't know. Look, I'm not going to lie to you about my opinion. I do think the brutal nature of these murders of white farmers does kind of indicate that there might be a political motivation behind it. The temperature on this issue is being raised in the country of South Africa. There are radical parties who are giving not so subtle cues to people that maybe this kind of behavior is okay. Maybe it is okay to take back the land by force.
I'm saying to you, we have not called for the killing of white people, at least for now. I can't guarantee the future.
There's also historical context that we're going to talk about a little later having to do with Zimbabwe and how they dealt with basically the same exact issue that South Africa is going through right now. But I like to present you guys facts and figures, and in reality, I just don't know the answer to that. South Africa is a violent country where a lot of violent murders happen. I'm sure you can find a political or racial motive for an individual farmer murder, but I can't say for sure that that's an overarching thing, and I'm not going to lie to you and get you pumped up about an issue that I'm really just speculating on. As for whether or not there's a trend in these murders or that they're on the rise, I also have to say I don't know. And if I'm being perfectly honest, nobody knows because South Africa does not track murder statistics by occupation. So we have to rely on the work of independent journalists going over to South Africa and documenting these stories to try and present some kind of statistical evidence, because South Africa is not tracking these murders. Now, not only do the South African police not track murder by occupation, they also have an incentive to downplay this, because white farmers in South Africa are really unpopular politically, and if there is a wink and a nod between the government and the people carrying out these murders, then they're not going to acknowledge that. So when you have presenters saying that this is 100% definitely happening, you have to check their sources. But conversely, when somebody says this is definitely not happening, and they use the official government statistics from South Africa, they're also being disingenuous, because they're glossing over the fact that not only does South Africa publicly not track murder by occupation, but if there is a wink and a nod, they would be deliberately skewing those statistics anyway. Now, before I move on to the next part of the story, there's a reason I wanted to separate these two things from one another. And that's because the left-wing media is using the ambiguity and uncertainty about the farmer's murder story to ignore the bigger overarching story, which is the expropriation of land without compensation. Now, I'm not going to recap the whole apartheid thing and the whole distribution of land thing, but post-apartheid, there was a system put in place to address the problems with land ownership under apartheid. It was decided that the government was going to work towards a goal of more black ownership of land. However, the white people that owned most of the land at the time that apartheid ended should be compensated for their land. So what the government decided to do was that when a white person wanted to sell their land, the government would buy it. And when the government wanted a specific piece of land, they would compensate the owner of that land at market value. Now, this angered a lot of the radicals in South Africa, and it's something that the left in America disagrees with. They try to oversimplify the issue. They'll give you an example like, oh, well, if your dad stole a car from me, and then he gave it to you, and then I figure out that you have my car that he stole, that's still my car, and you should just give it back. Now, this is an idiotic oversimplification from the left. It's more like if somebody's great-grandfather had the body of a car stolen from them, and then that person who stole it added tires, an engine, painted the thing, installed new seats, then sold it to somebody else, who sold it to somebody else, who then passed it along through multiple generations, and then somebody tracked down the descendant of the person who had the original car body stolen, and we have to decide what that person is entitled to. Because yes, there are components in that car that were stolen from that person, but at the same time, the person who originally stole it is not around anymore, and there has been value added to that car body, and it's completely different from when it was originally taken. So now the people of South Africa have to decide what percentage of that asset belongs to the descendant of the person who it was stolen from. Now, the government of South Africa essentially said that yes, these people are entitled to the car, but there was definitely work put into it by the people under apartheid, so they should be compensated, and this will kind of smooth out the process. Now, the radicals in South Africa say no. All of that work that was put into the car, all of the work that was put into the land to turn it into a productive farm, they shouldn't be compensated for that because of the original sin of it being stolen. So they think that they should be able to take land without compensation. Which brings us to an important question. What would happen if the radicals went out and all of the land was confiscated without compensation? Well, we actually know the answer to that question because this happened in Zimbabwe. They had a similar policy to post-apartheid South Africa, where they would compensate the landowners for their land, but the government would buy it back. However, people thought it was taking too long, the radicals took over, and they started expropriating property without compensation. And the consequences of those actions was that Zimbabwe crashed. There's a reason that the country of Zimbabwe is synonymous with inflation. Because when you establish that the government can just snatch property from anybody without compensation, you've effectively destroyed private property rights in that country. And nobody, after the government has shown that they're willing to just take what somebody else built, is going to invest in that country. So we know factually that these policies lead to economic damnation. And when you destroy the economy of your country, nobody benefits. So for me, while I understand why there's tension in South Africa, I understand that people are still angry about apartheid. I understand that apartheid wasn't that long ago. But the choice here is pretty simple. A slow march to a fairer system that benefits everyone, or an economic crash that hurts everyone. The leader of South Africa's Socialist Party is gaining steam. This is a man who said in an interview, "We're not calling for the killing of white people, at least not yet."
I'm saying to you, we have not called for the killing of white people, at least for now. I can't guarantee the future.
He was also convicted of a hate crime where he was singing a song about killing white farmers. Now, I think hate speech laws are ridiculous. I'm just telling you this so you get an idea of where this guy is coming from, and if his party continues to gain power, the direction South Africa is going to go in. The president of South Africa is often depicted as a moderate because he's against changing the constitution to allow for expropriation without compensation. However, while he's against changing the written constitution because that will inevitably lead to economic crash, he's not against expropriation without compensation. In order to cater to the radicals and hold on to power, he's currently trying to seize in the court system of South Africa 2 farms owned by white South Africans without compensation. Things are not looking good in South Africa. The radicals in South Africa are pushing for a policy that we know what the outcome of it will be. It's going to be bad. It's going to crash the economy. It's going to hurt everyone, including the people that supposedly they're aimed at helping. I hope this gets turned around and the people of South Africa learn to live together in a better way. I hope they stay true and pursue actual justice instead of social justice, because social justice is just revenge. A revenge that no one is going to benefit from. I want to give a special thank you to my patrons, Pepe Loves Trump, Louis Cool Dance, Mike Barbarossa, Alec, Cornell Havoc, and Melanie. Thank you guys so much for your support, and for the rest of you, let me know what you think about this topic in the comments, rate, share, all that jazz. You know what it is. I don't have to get into it. Till next time.